Hello, viewers. Welcome to the 5th episode of Procurement Basics, or episode 105. In this episode, we will be focusing on measurement and metrics. I'd like to start this episode off with a quote. I don't know who to attribute the quote to, but it is completely appropriate to what we're about to cover in this video. And the quote is, "We don't know how to measure the things that we care about, so we care about the things that we can measure." I don't think that there is a more appropriate quote to summarize and to explain the struggles of procurement organizations and most organizations in general on metrics and analytics that they care about. It's always a struggle to figure out what to measure and how to measure it. Over the last 4 videos, I have presented concepts that scale and grow with procurement organizations, from small companies all the way up to large corporations. As procurement departments evolve and grow, it is very important to have a set of measurements that they can hold themselves to and measure themselves by. So in today's video, we're going to cover metrics and measurements for procurement organizations, some industry best practices, some standard units of measurement, and some baselines and some targets to try to achieve. Let's get started. Unlike some of the other concepts that I've conveyed in other videos, this is definitely a situation where you are going to need a proper tool. You're going to need a tool set to help count, measure, and pull reports. I'm not going to be prescriptive about what those tools are. It's really more about the concepts of what you're measuring, but this is not stuff that can be done by hand, unless you are running a very, very small procurement operation. When it comes to analytics, the first thing that any department is going to do is start to count things. Procurement is no different. How many requests? How many contracts? How many purchase orders? How many catalogs? How many transactions? How many invoices came in? It's obviously incredibly important to know how to count things and to get those counts, but it's more important to put context around those counts. So what should a procurement department measure? The first major area is savings. If your procurement department isn't saving money, that procurement department shouldn't exist. One of the primary metrics within savings is procurement cost reduction. This is the true hard savings that a procurement department negotiates out of operational cost. These are the negotiated savings, the reduction of cost, dropping prices for consulting down by 20%, comparative analyses, the auctions, all of those things that we discussed in episode 3. This is the culmination, this is the savings that those activities bring. Another critical metric when it comes to savings and cost is procurement return on investment. There's a cost to procurement via headcount, via the tools that are used to support a procurement organization. What is the total cost in headcount, tools, and any other cost around that procurement department versus the savings that are brought in? That's your ROI. It's something that procurement departments should be consistently tracking and measuring themselves against, and it's important to understand what the true costs are of that procurement organization. There's another element of savings for a procurement organization, and that's cost avoidance. Now, for those of you in the procurement industry, you'll probably be nodding your head. Cost avoidance is something that sometimes your financial controllers don't always give you credit for, but it's the situations that you prevent through your active management and relationship overviews. It's avoiding, if it's a factory, it's avoiding having an outage, making sure machines don't fail. Anything that you can get a supplier to throw in extra for the same base fee is a cost avoidance situation. And again, it's critical to procurement, but it's not always recognized as true savings. Another element to cost understanding, which ultimately leads to cost savings, is the cost per transaction. Some procurement organizations will say cost per purchase order, but I'd like to expand it. We should really understand the cost per contract, the cost per purchase order, the cost per catalog creation, the cost per catalog transaction, which should be considerably less. We should understand the cost of our transactions, and we should also understand, if we're implementing new process or additions to that process, what the impact is to the cost. So every time a matrix partner or external customer group asks for another step, another security measure, there's a material cost to that. It impacts the cost per transaction, and that cost may have to be passed through to the customer if they're insistent upon having it. Depending on the size of an organization and the tools that are used, the cost per purchase order could be anywhere from $1.50 to $500. That's a huge, wide range, and that's why it's important to understand what the costs are. Another major area of measurement and tracking is time. How long does it take to do stuff? The major area of time tracking is lead time. And that's basically the amount of time from when a supplier receives an order to the time that the order is fulfilled. This is often measured in days, and I hope for your business that is the case. It's measured in days and not months, but it's something that could and should be tracked. Another unit of measurement is purchase order cycle time, or I would again say transaction cycle time. How long does it take for a contract to go through the entire approval process? How long does it take for a PO to go through the entire approval process? How many individuals are involved in that approval process? Is it arduous? Is your schedule of authority out of whack and there are way too many people involved to get a simple order out the door? Those are things that you should be looking at and things that we should be looking at to reduce time to get a purchase order out the door or a contract out the door. Every handoff equals more time. Some of those handoffs are important and may be a critical risk element or a matrix partner, but sometimes they may not be necessary. Look hard at your handoffs. Once you get past the basics, time, amounts, numbers, now you start to get into more complex areas like compliance. Compliance is a major reason why procurement exists. I mentioned a lot of this in episode 4. Most companies aren't going to get 100% compliance spend, and they probably don't want 100%. There are plenty of suppliers that are low risk and low cost, that don't need a lot of attention and don't need sophisticated payment vehicles. But there are others that are core and critical to the business that should have more stringent and compliant spend vehicles in place. Without the appropriate compliant spend vehicles in place, Maverick's spend is going to skyrocket. If there aren't policies in place to ensure that people aren't buying on their credit cards and through other rogue means, they're going to do it. They're going to follow the path of least resistance. It's critical to have compliant payment vehicles that are relatively easy to follow and understand, so your customers use those policies and procedures versus going off on their own and having to have their hands slapped at a later time. Typical metrics in the compliance area are the ratio of disputed invoices to total invoices, and also the total difference between the price paid and the price quoted. Under the compliance bucket, there are 3 major areas of control that you want to look at. One is supplier spend under management. So of the total number of suppliers that your company is doing business with, how many of those suppliers are under tight controls or under compliant payment vehicles? Good, not great procurement organizations are typically at 50%. For every dollar that's placed under management, the average enterprise or company sees a benefit of 6 to 12% in returns and savings. Another area of compliance that's critical to measure and to enforce is the number of suppliers within the organization. I've mentioned this in previous videos. Too little suppliers doesn't give you enough options for savings, no competition. But too many creates chaos and noise, and you can never put a formal program together to manage and measure all of these suppliers. There's a fine balance between too many and too little. Most mature organizations typically bring on too many suppliers. Another area of compliance measurement is PO accuracy. How often are the goods that are on the purchase order being delivered? How often are the POs being changed? Money's being added, money's being reduced. Anytime a PO is really changing is something that should be evaluated, measured, and reported on. I'm not saying this is a best practice, but typically in the organizations that I run, we don't change purchase orders. If you need more money, you create another purchase request. Don't change the record because it's just going to create chaos and potential auditing issues. I'm not saying there isn't a valid reason and there's not a good business process to mitigate that. I'm just saying in general, if you can avoid it, avoid it. Another major area of measurement and metrics is supplier quality data. This isn't always easy to measure consistently. One thing to look for is supplier quality ratings. Now this can come in different areas. You may have a third-party service that provides some quality data and how they're generally performing in the market. That's good information to have. Highly recommend subscribing to things like that. Internally, you may have quality data measurements based on their service level agreements or delivery times or errors, right? It depends on the type of commodity and good that you're buying, but there should be a unit of measurement based on whatever their output is. What is your intended outcome and did they deliver it? Another area of measurement is that supplier frequently changing pricing on you? That's something that should be consistently tracked and also reported on. Where and if possible, it's important to measure suppliers' defect rates. Whatever they're supposed to be providing, are they doing it on a consistent basis? In areas where it's a simple commodity, it could be that they didn't deliver the right thing or they delivered a damaged product. But in areas where it is a service, it could be that they delivered that service wrong, there was a problem, or let's say it's a piece of code that you hired someone to do, it doesn't work right. What's hard in these situations is to have a consistent unit of measurement. Procurement organizations and people in general have a tendency of overcooking this. Sometimes it's better to have something rather than nothing. It could be a binary statement. Did this supplier meet their SLAs? Yes. Did this supplier introduce defects into the environment? No. Are they highly valuable from a data perspective? No, but at least it's something homogenized that you can measure across multiple spaces. And again, regarding that defect rate, availability is another unit of measurement. If it's a software as a service provider, what's the uptime of the websites that they provide to you? Does the supplier have capacity to perform a service for you if you need it in a relatively short period of time? Is there an SLA associated with that they do have rapid response times? Do they meet them? If there's a problem ticket, how often do they solve it? Do they meet their SLA? SLA, by the way, service level agreement. Don't want to assume that you know that. Finishing up these basic metrics, here's one that's a bit of a dark horse. Not every company looks at this. Automation. In the case of procurement, automation could be a couple of things, but the primary one is catalogs. Can you take this thing that you've negotiated, these rates, can you make it available to an end user where a procurement person doesn't have to get directly involved, but the customer benefits from the negotiated pricing? Catalogs are awesome. In cases where you can use them, you should. Anything that you can turn into a catalog, try it. It may fail, it may not work, there may be complications, but you're better off for trying. Every transaction that goes through a catalog is a transaction that a human being didn't have to touch, and they can focus on something that's more critical. There is one last metric I do want to cover. I forgot to put it into the other section, and that's diversity. Many procurement organizations are focusing on their diversity spend, where they are focusing their dollars on minority suppliers, military-owned suppliers, LGBT suppliers, women-owned suppliers. There's been an awakening on how companies are responsibly spending their money, and this is an important metric to understand and to evaluate. There are third-party companies that can help identify who's classified as diverse suppliers, and you could run your spend against that list. This wraps up the basics of metrics and measurement for this video. This is by no means comprehensive. There are so many different avenues that a company can go down depending on what their critical needs are. But it is important also that companies measure some kind of common elements across other companies so they know if they're performing well. Metrics are hard. Defining metrics, gathering the data, it's never easy. Data analysis, data mining, those are some of the most popular and growing fields in all job industries. Doesn't matter if it's procurement or not. But procurement as a whole, the data and the work that we do, has a wealth of information that can be mined to drive better cost, better practices, better behavior. The data that we use is still the tip of the iceberg when it comes to procurement. It's going to grow so much in the future. Video number 5 is the last planned video of this series. As I mentioned in the introduction video, I am willing to answer questions via Twitter. So if you guys want to send me questions at Joey Lombardi on Twitter, I'll write them down, I'll create some answers, and I'll film it in a 6th and final video in this series. If there are enough deep topics, I may even create a second season, a 201 if you will, with more in-depth topics. But for now, this is the end of the series. Thank you so much for watching. I had a blast doing it, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Thank you.